When you're installing a custom car audio system, you're bound to run into different issues that require fabrication and installation techniques in order to solve. In this video, we're going to be tackling several of those different issues as I install these new 6.5-inch speakers into these speaker pods. We're going to solve challenges like how do we modify the pod in order to accept the speaker? How do we sound treat the pod in order to avoid resonance, and how do we make sure that we have no air leaks? What can we use as an aftermarket wiring solution for this speaker pod? I'm Mark, welcome to CarAudioFabrication, the show where together we learn how to master car audio and how to design, build, and install our dream car audio system. Let's get started. It's obvious, the main reason I want to modify these is to improve the sound. And speaking of improving the sound, I do want to take a quick second to thank monthly channel sponsor, Audio Control. When it comes to adding amplifiers to a factory car audio system, we need a way to adapt the speaker level signal and send out RCA level signal to our new amplifiers. One of the best ways to do that is using the LC2i Pro. Obviously, this gives us our signal conversion from the speaker level signal to the RCA outputs, but this also gives us other features like AccuBass. A lot of factory radios will actually reduce the bass as you turn up the volume in order to protect the inexpensive stock speakers, but if we replace those speakers and they can handle the bass, obviously we want to retain that bass. So the AccuBass allows us to add that information back into the signal. Additionally, this gives us a bunch of other features that make it really good for today's latest vehicles and integrating with the factory signal. If you guys want to learn more, check out the video that I did about this device at the link down in the video description. First step of modification here, unfortunately, my new speaker as of right now will not fully sit down into the pod, and the reason for that is they include these tabs. There's nothing wrong with these tabs, actually they're a good thing because if your speaker was a little bit smaller size, it allows you to use those mounting holes so that you can use that smaller size speaker, but in this case we're bigger, so we need to remove those tabs. Now normally you could do so just using a file or a hacksaw, but I want to make sure that that cut is nice and pristine, so I'm going to turn to the router, and I've already made myself a nice little wood template here that matches the cutout of this speaker. To prep for making this cut on the router, I stick template tape onto my template, peel away the backing paper, and stick it in place. So the plan is to use this dado bit, and what this will do is that bearing will ride against my wooden template, and then the cutting flutes will cut away that plastic material. Now there is a problem though. If I try to set the pod flat onto the router table, I can't right now because this little leg sticks out past that face. So in order to make it so that I can sit it flat, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a wooden spacer, just a piece of wood going across here that's about a 1/2 inch thick, which will give me enough clearance for that to no longer be touching the same surface. And I will just stagger the piece of wood between these tabs that I need to cut off, that way it's not in the way. So basically we're going to look something like this. If this piece of wood was in the way of some of the cutting tabs, I could stick it with template tape once and make these cuts here, and then unstick it and just rotate and make the rest of my cuts. It's kind of hard to see, but there's no tab in this area here or here, so luckily I don't have to do that. So I'm going to stick it in place like so. I've carefully adjusted the bit height out of the table, so now I can lift this over it and then carefully make my cut. With that, the tabs and the rest of the material is cut perfectly flush and away. Now the speaker will mount perfectly flush with this surface like it's supposed to. The next upgrade I need to do to these pods has to do with the wiring. The factory pods use this smaller wiring, and I'd like to upgrade the wire size for our speaker wires. And the other thing is, I don't want to have to dissect this and remove it from the stock pod. That way, if I did ever want to return the vehicle to stock, it's easy to do so. I can swap these back in. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use these aftermarket plugs. That way the serviceability of my aftermarket pod will be just like the OEM pod. I could disconnect it easily if need be. It's not like I have to cut any speaker wiring or anything like that. If you guys want to see a full video I did about these connectors, I'll link it up in the corner of the screen. In order to prep for using this connector, I want it to be mounted right here in this hole location, and obviously we need to seal up that hole. So what I've done on the laser is I've cut this profile that matches that way I can seal it up with some adhesive. And the other thing I need to do over on the router is I want want to add a rabbited groove to this edge. That way it sits down within this hole and gives me a little bit more contact area to seal it up with some CA glue. This is the rabbiting bit that I'm using to create this small lip, and I of course want to make sure that I'm good and safe using a push block, as this is a very small piece. So there you can see that ever so slight edge that allows me to locate this into the hole, just like this. To adhere the plate in position and make sure I get a good airtight seal, I'm using CA glue along with the activator. The next thing I want to do, and this will by far make the biggest difference for the sound of these, is I want to sound treat these with some sound barrier material. In this case, I'm using the Sound Shield material. This is a 3-layer material. It has that typical butyl rubber and the aluminum foil that you're probably used to seeing with sound treatment materials, but this also adds a closed cell acoustic foam on the top. The idea here is by treating these, we're going to avoid any resonance in the pod. Let's do the good old knock test. I've already treated this one. This pod is a pretty complex shape, so we want to think smart about how we cut this stuff out. So what I'm doing is I'm tracing the outside edge, cutting that with a really sharp knife, and then I can also use a circular punch in order to make my perfect hole to allow the speaker wire to pass through. I then carefully position it in place, and you guys are probably familiar with this step. We want to make sure that we get a nice good bond with the adhesive of the material and the pod itself, so we're using a wooden roller to stick the two together. There's a couple of other big benefits to doing the sound treatment on the inside. Now, normally our speaker wire could potentially vibrate against the plastic and create noise when it's inside here. But with that closed cell foam on all of these surfaces, now it's decoupled. In other words, it cannot vibrate against the surface and make any noise. Another thing is these pods are designed to be used with several different speaker sizes, and one of the speaker sizes might have these legs that extend and pick up these 3 mounting bolts instead. But the problem is that's a through hole right there. So what I did is I've cut a small piece of material and stuck it up against that surface. I want to make sure that each of these holes is completely sealed off. Otherwise, you can end up with sort of a whistling noise. Another thing to pay attention to is when they manufacture these, they're made in 2 separate halves. You can see the split line here, and I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe they then join the 2 halves together by kind of melting them together. What could potentially happen though is you might end up with just a slight air leak on that crack. So what it's best to do is to make sure you completely go around that seam on the inside so that your material is on both sides of it, completely sealing it off. In order to be extra sure that this wire isn't going to vibrate against the speaker itself, we're also going to treat it with some Wrap It. This is a product that I helped Sound Shield come up with, and this is just the closed cell foam with an adhesive. That way you can decouple different surfaces throughout a car audio build. For good measure, I also add some acoustic batting material on the inside of these enclosures. That way they will perform as if they are a larger air volume. Finally, I want to make sure I get a super good seal with the speaker flange against the mounting flange of the pod, so I'm applying some speaker gasketing tape. Don't forget that all the materials I'm using in this video are linked down in the video description. Now all that's left to do is connect the speaker wiring and then mount these into the pods. Now that these pods are completely sound treated and we've solved the other issues, we can get them reinstalled back into the vehicle. Now we still have plenty more to do on this vehicle. I still need to make a mounting solution for the knob and the dash. I need to complete the custom speaker pods, and I need to install the subwoofers. If you want to catch those videos, I'd love to have you as a subscriber, and I'll also add them to the playlist. Don't forget, next time you are adding amplifiers to a system and you need a way to adapt the factory signal, I definitely recommend show sponsor Audio Control and their LC2i Pro. If you're unfamiliar with this, you definitely want to check out that AccuBase feature. To learn more, check out the links down in the video description. A big thanks to them, along with Bart, Mike, Ali, Francis, Jerry, Marcos, William, and the rest of the Patreon membership team. A big thanks to all those guys for making these videos possible. And of course, thank you for watching.